All right, so what we're doing is we're going to be doing this worksheet. I'll do some of the problems and then you'll finish the rest of them, okay? This is the basis for the rest of the chapter. So make sure if you have questions you ask. Don't worry about this page right now. I'll explain it later, okay? So let's start here. So we're going to be dealing with radical, and a radical is the same thing as a square root, okay? And exponents, remember exponents are little numbers, 2, 3, 4, squared, cubed to the fourth power, okay? So I want us to look here, and I want you to notice the difference. This is radical form, this is exponential form, and this is the answer simplified. So I want you to see that this equals this, that equals this. This one equals this one, that equals this one. This one equals this one, that equals this one. And do me a favor, let's actually cross that off because that's incorrect. It's just 4, okay? So that shouldn't even be there. So let's talk about square root. When the square root, you guys know that the square root of 64 is 8. That's something you've learned. That's what your calculator told you. But now I want you to look at it in a little bit different way. I want you to look at it as it having an imaginary 2 right there, okay? We don't write it because it's imaginary. We just know it. So what we're thinking of is what times what, two things, is 64, and that's 8. Don't worry about the plus or minus right now. This is saying what times what is 64, and that's 4. This is saying what times what times what times what times what times what is 64, and that's 2. Notice the difference between them. Here there are 2 things that multiply. Here there are 3 things that multiply, and here there are 6. If you look, they look very similar, but the answers are very different, okay? Now, I don't think you have a hard time with that. But what I want you to think about is don't even look at the center yet, okay? So if we're just looking at the left and the right, if I just left it as 8, plus or minus, if I left it as 8, then I could get the 64. But then also, if I went negative 8 squared, I could also get positive 64, which is why the answer is plus or minus 8. But if you look here, if I go 4 times 4 times 4, that is 64. But if I go negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4, that is not positive 64. That would be negative 64, which is why the answer is just positive 4, okay? And then the next thing, let me white this out just to make it super clear, okay, is if I had this. If I had 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, obviously that's 64. Not obviously, but your calculator would tell you that, or you'd multiply it out. 2 times 2, 4 times 2, 8 times 2, 16 times 2, 32 times 2, 64. But if I made these negative, a negative and a negative, positive, a negative and a negative, positive, a negative and a negative, positive. So what does that tell you? If you have an even square root, well, let me make it up here. I'll write it up here. So if it's even, there's going to be a plus or minus, okay? So if it's even, it's an even root, it's going to be plus or minus. So if you look here, this is even, plus or minus. This is even, plus or minus. Okay? So what's a little bit different now is the center, which is called exponential form. So what I want you to see is instead of writing the square root, I could write it only using exponents, which means there's no square root anymore. When I say square root, it really means to the 1/2 power. So when you look here, if you see the square root, it's to the 1/2 power. If you see the cube root, notice how I wrote down how to say it. We're going to practice that. It's to the 1/3. If I say the 6th root, it's to the 1/6. So I bet you would figure out that when you change it to exponential form, you change it into a fraction. So what's going to happen is you're going to be simplifying the expression, but you're not just going to be giving me the answer. You're going to be changing it to exponential form and then simplifying it, or having it in exponential form and then changing it to radical form and then simplifying it, okay? Not just picking up your calculator and getting the answer. You're going to prove that it's the right answer. So this is a radical expression. I want you to change it to exponential and simplify it. So 196, now you might not know, but you'll use your calculator, is the same thing as 14 squared. But then you have the square root So it means to the 1/2 power. Okay. Now, half of 2 is 1, and 14 to the first power is just 14. But since it is an even square root, you got to put plus or minus. Okay. All right, let's do the next one. 216. We have to figure out what times what times what is 216. So if you're not sure, you're going to pick up your calculator. 5 times 5 times 5. Nope, too small. Clear. 6 times 6 times 6, 216. You'll get good at these that you just know it. So that's 6 cubed. But then this is in rad form. You've got to change that to exponential, to the 1/3. So that cancels. 6 to the first is 6. There is no plus or minus. There's your answer. The next one. We have to figure out what times what times what. I would ignore the negative. What times what times what times what times what times what times what is 1, and that's 1. But it's negative, so -1. -1 to the 7th power is -1. But then I have to the 7th power. These cancel, and I'm left with -1. It's taken to an odd root, so there's no plus or minus. Now, this time, I have it in exponential form, and I want you to change it to rad form. So, this means, like it did in number 1, the square root of 100. And we can put the imaginary 2, so you can see it. And then the square root of 100 is the same thing as 10 squared. These two cancel. My answer is 10. But since it is an even square root, plus or minus. Okay, so you can't just write square root of 100 is 10. You can't just do that. You used to be able to, but now you have to prove that you can simplify it. Okay, so I have to change this to rad form. So it's the 4th root of 16. And I want to talk about it. I'm not doing a super great job, but when you see the radical in there, you need to show the 4th root is in there. Okay, or if I have the cube root is in there. So the highlighter is such a thick pen, it's hard to fit it. Okay, so now I have to think what times what times what times what gives me 16, and that's 2. 2 to the 4th root. Make it look better. Okay, these are gone. My answer is 2. It's an even root, plus or minus. Next one. Put this in rad form. Cube root, I'll fit it better. There we go. So now I have to figure out what times what is 8. That's 2, and it's negative. So -2, put it in parentheses when it's negative. Cubed, cube root, those cancel. The answer is -2. You can't have a plus or a minus because the answer is negative. And it's an odd root. Now, this time, I want you to find as many real roots as you can, okay? So I want you to write it as many different ways. So one way is I can take it exactly how it is, 4th root, okay? So there's the 4th root. Now, just forget that highlighter. That's one way to do it. Another way to rewrite this as what times what times what times what is 81. So I can go like this. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nope. 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll get good at this. You won't need the calculator. So I can rewrite this as 3 to the 4th power. I could actually simplify it as 3 plus or minus 3. I could rewrite this, instead of simplifying it in radical form, I could simplify it in exponential form. That's one way. That's really 3 to the 4th to the 1/4. I actually prefer exponential form, but it's not like it matters. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways to do this problem. Okay. I actually could do it another way. I could actually go 3 squared to the 1/4. It's another way. Okay. I could actually rewrite this as -3 to the 4th to the 1/4, because remember, my answer is not only positive, but it's negative. All right, I think that's enough. Cube root of -125. Put the little 3 in there. -125. When you're seeing the negative, ignore it. What times what times what is 125? That's 5. and simplify this -5. There is no plus or minus. Exponential form, -125 to the 1/3. You know I'm going to put something like this on the test. -5 cubed to the 1/3, and that's a bunch of ways there. Okay, let's do the next one. The 6th root of 729. Okay, I'm going to figure out what times what times what. I got to do it 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so 3 to the 6th power, 6th root, 3 plus or minus because it's an even root, which also means I could write it as -3 to the 6th root. I could also put it in exponential form, 729 to the 1/6, 3 to the 6th to the 1/6. I'm just trying to equate it there. Could also rewrite it as -3 to the 6th to the 1/6. Okay, let's go to the next one. The 2nd root of -49. I could also write it like this. I don't need the 2. Okay. Now this one I'm kind of messing with you, so let me do this one. I can rewrite it like that. But the problem is nothing times nothing is going to give you 49. But I could -49, but I could rewrite this as -1 times 7 squared, which means I'm really writing it as the square root of -1 times the square root of 7 squared. This should remind you of imaginary numbers, the letter I. When you simplify that, your answer is 7i. Okay? I could rewrite this as 7 squared to the 1/2 times -1 to the 1/2, where -1 to the 1/2 is just the square root of -1, which gives you your 7i. Okay? Let's look at the next one. Okay? I guess it's, let's see, C number 1 homework. So, let's go here. We're turning. I'm going to do a few of these homework problems. Okay? Actually, I think I'll stop the video and then do some of the homework problems.